was a family event in the 50s, right?
Yeah, and then that's when they were registering everybody for the draft. And I got registered again because the first time I registered I was in 1948, and then I had to re-register in 50. And then the invasion from North Korea to South Korea was in June of 1950, and I didn't think nothing of it at the time, except by December they start drafting like crazy. They were drafting 80,000 a month, and I figured, well, it won't be long before I get called, and it wasn't. In December I got classified 1A, and then January, the end of January, they sent me an induction notice, and oh no, wait, it was the beginning of February that I got my induction notice. And I went into service the 24th of February, 1951. And I went down to Kentucky for training. And I spent 14 weeks training, infantry training. And I thought for sure I was going to Korea. And it just happened that the day, I figured, well, we're going to go to Korea, but it just happened a couple of months before that. They had sent 2 divisions over to Germany, and they were undermanned. So they needed replacements to fill them out. So that's when I got sent to Germany. And I was one happy guy because everybody was going to Korea. There was very, very few. But then they start sending more to Germany because they were afraid of the Russians. And we were way undermanned in Germany. We couldn't have lasted 2 days against them with what we had there. So then I went there, and I enjoyed being in Germany because nobody was shooting at me there. But going to Korea, that was all mountains, and everybody was being shot at there.
What else was happening in your family in the 50s?
Well, let's see, in the 50s. Everybody was having pretty good standard of living, and things were really good then. The economy was good in the earlier 50s. And then I got out of the service, and I just went back to work. And after I got out in early 1953, and the Korean War ended in September of 1953. And then I guess something like 7,000 or 8,000 guys that had been held prisoner were released. And I remember reading that they said there was a lot more that had died in prison than that they didn't account for. So
Go ahead.
And when I got out, they were like when your Uncle Roy got out of the Army, they gave them guys a bonus, the state. Well, somebody brought up the bill about giving the guys that were in the Korean War a bonus, but they voted that down, and they never brought it up again, so I never got that. But
going on in the world in the 50s?
I think it was when the Sputniks started, because I remember my dad would drive and he'd tell me to look out for the Sputniks. That's the only thing I can recall. I know I like to look. I remember when.
What do you remember about the 50s?
When he was a baby.
No, anything happening?
No, it was a very quiet year, 10 years. Nothing happened.
On a larger scale in the world going on that you remember?
Well, I remember the war. The Korean War was started in the 50s, wasn't it?
And was that significant to you, or?
Well, some of the friends that I had that were older than I think it was my sister's friends, went to the Army and the Navy at that time. I have vague memories of that.
Do you remember anything about the world in the 50s, 60s? Right?
60s.
That was interesting to you.
Oh, I remember the riots in Chicago. My ex-husband was a Chicago policeman. It was a time of turmoil, a presidential election, Kennedy being assassinated. I remember that vividly. Things like of that nature.
The 60s.
Oh, a lot. 60s is where everything happened. I remember, of course, I remember vaguely the space program in the early 60s. Grissom being pulled out of the water. I remember, of course, the Kennedy assassination. I was home with my grandmother the day it happened. We were watching Boza Circus, and they interrupted it and told us horrible things were happening in Dallas. And the funeral, who could ever forget the 3 days of live television, the funeral and everything. And I remember the Beatles coming on Ed Sullivan. Well, I think I knew them better before Ed Sullivan. I think I had their poster in the hospital when I was sick, early in the 60s. The Vietnam War, of course, started I never knew about it until it took my brother in the draft and then sent them out there. And it became very important. And then all the protests, 1968, the incredible dual assassination of Kennedy and Martin Luther King, the riots, the convention, Chicago Convention riots, and then finally us orbiting the moon at the end of that year. That was a significant year. The landing on the moon. I guess I'm covering history as well as my own memory. My own memory too, of course, is of my dad's surgery.
Was in Vietnam. He was in the Army. And he served a year over in Vietnam, and he was almost killed. In one of their engagements, they were trapped by the Viet Cong, and only through sheer luck, some big tanks were nearby. There were 300 of the Americans, and they were surrounded by 3,000 Viet Cong. And these tanks came through and rescued them because the Viet Cong were going to kill them. And they thought they would get it done in an hour or two. But instead they fought back. And he was a medic, and he had to go out onto the wherever the engagement was, and he had to pick up the wounded and try to get them out of danger. And in that one engagement, he rescued about 34 people, and did it under constant fire. He was getting hit by bullets coming on to the right of him and to the left of him. And for his bravery, he got a Bronze Star for bravery, which he never cared about, because when they came back from Vietnam, they were treated like criminals. They weren't even given any credit for what they did. Now, after about 15 or 20 years, I think it's 20 years, they're now starting to give them some of the credit they should have got when they first came back.
What do you remember about the 60s? What's your best recollection of the 60s?
What happened in the 60s, I was
What do you remember?
becoming a little bit older. The Russians were coming, which they never came. Kennedy got elected. Of course, there was a whole bunch of other people that, no, wait, I get the years mixed up. But Kennedy got elected, I do remember that. The Russians didn't come, and the missiles of October, the space program, well, the beginning of the space program, Kennedy's assassination, not necessarily in the proper order, but hey. What do you remember about the 60s?
Well, what I remember is a lot of great cartoons, when cartoons were real cartoons. I remember being interrupted by details like President Kennedy assassination when they discontinued Garfield Goose and pissed me off real bad. And I remember the Vietnam War. I remember, was that Woodstock, I believe, 69? A lot of President Nixon. I remember Kennedy. I think Nixon was in the 60s, right? No?
He was only vice president.
Oh, well, okay, all right.
Yes, it was in the 60s.
No, was it the 50s?
One
No,
year,
it was
one year.
the 50s. 1 year, yeah.
Okay, so I was pretty close.
Whatever.
And I remember grammar school, and the snowstorm of school, and the snowstorm of '67, and the riots of '69, and it's pretty much covered. Turmoil in the '60s, actually, eye-opening turmoil.
What do you remember, guys?
Riverview,
Cool, that's cool.
definitely Riverview.
Whatever, I can't remember.
Okay, why do you like
The
Riverview?
happiest thing was
Let's go on to Riverview for a minute. What did you like and remember about
the
Riverview?
Italian Bobs. I remember being scared to death. My father kind of persuaded me or almost forced me onto the roller coaster, and I loved him for it from then on. Because probably my favorite roller coaster in all life. I've never found one to be any better. Maybe it was the time, maybe it was the style, maybe it was just me, but I never found one better. It was a smooth, exciting ride rather than a rough, throw you around kind of ride. And the Riverview wasn't too far from the house, and all the lights, and activity. It was a real exciting place. I also did a lot of swimming.
What historically was happening in the world of the nation that you remember in the 60s?
Like I say, they landed the moon. I mean, a man on the moon. I mean, was that 50s or 60s? I forget what the hell date it was.
60,
But
69, thank you.
69. They landed the guy on moon there, but I figure what are they going to discover up there? If discover more down in the ocean, where they got more resources and more wealth, they gain more. But up in the sky there, they ain't going to get nothing up there. It's too damn far out.
What was the most memorable thing that was happening in the 60s? In the world.
In the world.
In the world.
Okay. Probably the death of President Kennedy. That was a few days after my daughter was born. Weeks, maybe a couple weeks after Renee was born. That just kind of blew me away. I didn't think that could ever happen again. I mean, it had happened. I never thought anyone could get away with it in those days. We were so modern then,
Yeah.
But we weren't.
Anything else that happened in the world in the 60s?
We went to the moon, didn't we? I believe. And we were on a vacation, unfortunately, but I still remember it. We listened to it on the radio, and that was quite eventful. And of course, I've seen many pictures and movies of it, and that was very exciting. Never thought we'd do that.
Anything else happen in the 60s?
You trying to pry me for something that I can't remember?
Well, you remember Kennedy, you remember the moon.
Yeah.
There was also the war. I shouldn't lead
Another
I
war.
shouldn't lead the witness.
To the war?
What do you remember was going on in the world in the 60s?
I remember hearing about the President Kennedy being assassinated and shot.
I mean, you were very young then, huh?
I was very young.
That's...
Yeah, that's about all worldly. Probably, there was a lot going up with NASA, probably in the space program back then too. It always seems like there was astronauts in the news, but I don't remember too, just so young.
Okay. And that's all you remember? Well, don't remember the war? Or...
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't.
All right. You were lucky.
Yeah, I was. Pretty
yeah.
sheltered.
Yeah. In the world in the 60s. Anything?
Other than that, what we just talked
We
with
were
the
said-
Kennedys and Oswald.
Yeah.
What the heck was it?
63.
I don't remember in the years, and then like you said, then Bobby, didn't he get killed too after
Yes, he
after Martin Luther
Kennedy,
King?
right.
So there was the three of them as far as outstanding in the world.
Okay. We can move on to